Hi, Shana. I'm so excited to have you with us today. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well, I have to say. I feel good. How about you?
Good. Today has been a struggle. Shana is just such an amazing guest already because tolerated the whirlwind, which is me blowing in, being like, things are broken. I don't know what I'm doing. What's going on? Anyways, you graciously tolerated that. So that's how I know this is going to be a great conversation. And so I'm glad you're doing well. I want to jump right in and talk to you about what we really have you here for, which is we've talked before about healthy eating and all of that, but I really want to revisit and have as many professionals as I can on here helping us as Black women live our best lives. And foundationally, that just has to be what we put in our bodies, how we fuel it, how we move it, right? That's just like the basic level. And so I want to start with the misconceptions. Like, what do you think, when people hear the word dietitian,
Oh gosh, yes.
cringe, right? What are the misconceptions you encounter about one, what you do, and about nutrition in general?
Yeah, I think whenever people hear dietitian, they equate it with food police. And I notice whenever I'm at parties or just any social gathering where there's food, everyone does that thing where they cover they eat or they're like, don't look at what I'm eating, which is so funny because I'm always usually eating the same thing, the same thing there. So the biggest misconception, I am not the food police. I am not going to say not to eat something that you enjoy. Especially if I'm not, or if you're not my client and this isn't a counseling session, like please, do what you want to do. But, I always say that food should taste good. We should enjoy what we're eating. Of course, there are ways to incorporate nutrients and nourish our bodies in a certain way, but I think that food should be joyful. So that's definitely the biggest misconception. And I think most dietitians would agree with me, but that's my take. And the biggest misconception in food, there's so many. Honestly, it's so hard to choose from. And I was thinking about this, like what the biggest one would be. And I think now I post a lot about like packaged foods and processed foods because that's usually the thing that's in the media the most, and not for the best reasons. And so I always say that there's a wide range of packaged foods and processed foods. Not all the foods are going to be the most bountiful of nutrients, right? But there are foods that do come in a package that can nourish us. So I think that's the biggest misconception with food. So there's a wide range here. So I think those are the two things I think about the most. Yeah.
There's definitely a wide range. I totally get that. What are some others? So I know you said you were torn, so give us a few more.
Yeah. And I think another thing would be maybe this does fall under the packaged foods, but the fact that I see the word clean foods being also thrown around, the word clean. And I just want to say, not that I'm fully against using that word. Like if you want to describe your food that way, go ahead. But just know that there's not like an actual definition of clean in the food industry or, even in the government. So one person's version of clean eating can mean something different to someone else. And I think many people don't realize that because when you ask somebody, well, what do you think mean? Like, what's the definition of clean foods? Everyone's going to have a different definition. And so I noticed that word being thrown around a ton. So just so people know, you don't have to describe your food that way. It's totally okay. So I think those two would be, that would be another one.
No, I think that's big because you're right. Like I have often said, "Oh, how do you eat? I eat clean." And I'm sure that the way I say that and how I describe it is very different to someone else's idea of clean. And I also think it's really important, and I don't think I've had other people talk about this before about packaged food. There's a lot of shaming going on. And like you said, for some good reasons, like there's some expose about something. And of course, really heavily processed foods are not great for anyone, but there's a lot of clean food that is healthy for you, right? Yeah. That is packaged, I don't know if this is right up. So, there's a lot of there's like organic lettuce, for example, that is in a package, but that's not necessarily the same as some heavily processed food that's just chemicals all in the background. Is that kind of what you're talking about?
Yeah, and I think that that's the biggest misconception because even organic doesn't mean pesticide free. It just means that maybe it's more of a local farm that grew it and harvested it, but it still uses pesticides. And it doesn't necessarily mean that's scary. It just means that, that you're still nourishing yourself, but maybe just in a different way. So that's another thing. A lot of times there's that misconception as well with organic. And I'm not saying not to buy organic if people want to do that, but just so no one feels shame in not eating only organic. It's hard. But yeah, I notice that a lot. Whenever I say there are some processed foods that are good for us, people automatically think I'm talking about potato chips or what else? I mean, cookies, like all of the quote unquote, like unhealthy foods. And I'm not. I'm actually talking about the ready-made salads, that come in the kits that people can throw together, or even a can of beans, because who has time to like soak beans overnight? So, those things are still processed, but they're still nourishing us. So I just want people to be more mindful of how, we view food. I think it's important.
Yeah, and that kind of brings me to how does that show up in your practice, right? So you start with these assumptions, actually deconstructing these assumptions that we have about food.
Mm-hmm.
How does that influence your practice and how you help people?
Definitely. So I actually work in public health. I'm a public health dietitian. I work for the city of New York, and I do nutrition lessons. And so the primary demographic for my lessons are usually lower income folks. And so, there's, again, a lot of misconceptions. Oh, certain people don't care about their health, and that's not true. They're just as concerned. It's just that there's a lot of shame. Again, in the packaged foods, I notice that a lot of them after my lessons will come to me and say, well, I can't really afford the kale. It's pretty expensive, or I don't have time to, cook every night. And, so there's that guilt. And I just want to kind of nip that because I think that we're all going to nourish ourselves differently. So I always say it doesn't have to be kale. I mean, I don't think many people like kale to begin with. Like, it has a very distinct taste, but there are many other leafy greens that you can possibly buy. Even the frozen vegetables that you can buy, those, I actually prefer that myself because I call my refrigerator like a vegetable hospice because I forget about the fresh produce that's in there. So, so I actually myself use a ton of frozen vegetables. And so I always encourage people to find a way to nourish themselves that works for them because I understand it's hard. Many people are working multiple jobs. Many people have multiple mouths to feed. So find a way to nourish yourself that works.
Yeah, I think that is the key takeaway. And it's so funny. It's hard, right? Like there's this level of like people want like a recipe almost of like, well, just tell me what to eat and how to eat it, right?
Yes.
And then on the other side, we have over in so many ways, right? We made it a pathology of dieting and diet culture. And it's like overprescribed. Like you must eat this many ounces of this at 8:00 in the morning. And then, so it's like, it's trying to find that middle ground. How do you help people? I feel like that's like the last question I want to say for this segment before we move on. But how do you help people find the middle? Like, what does the middle look like where there's a little bit of structure, right? Mm-hmm. But it's not as prescribed as you saying, well, you have to do this diet and you only have to eat kale and
yeah. Yeah, I think, it's so interesting because I think like when we're talking about diets, we're so used to being given a set of rules. And sometimes those rules just don't work for us. In fact, most of the time they do not work for us, which is why, like, if you ask somebody how many diets they've been on in a lifetime, it will be a list of like 20. I mean, I don't love to bring her up, but Oprah is a great example, right? Like, how many diets has she been on? So I think sometimes we need to let go of that mentality. And my personal favorite thing to tell people is think about the nutrients to add to your day, right? So if you like a certain food, I will always use this particular client as an example. She loved ramen noodles, right? Like just love them. I think it was like a nostalgic type of thing. They're also fast. I said, okay, you like your ramen noodles. Maybe we can work on adding vegetables to it. Maybe we can add the vegetables you like that you'll eat to the ramen. Maybe we can also add some grilled chicken in there because it's just noodles to really fill you up. So I always say, what can you add to your day? How can you add in an extra serving of vegetables, an extra serving of fruits, some protein? Think about that instead of the restriction. And that usually clicks with people.
Yeah, that's really powerful. And I think that brings us to what we're going to talk about next, which is joy. Like, I think the real goal of this episode and the reason why I wanted to have you on is to remember that eating is a joyful activity. Like, it needs to be, and it should stay that way. It's not eating joyfully or healthily, right? It's how to do that. But that may be a little bit of a process for some folks, depending on where you are in your food journey and what you eat day to day. And so when we come back with you, Shana, I want to just dive a little bit into how do we actually put a little bit more into practice eating joyfully, like centering joy in every bite is really the way I see it. So more to come. Yes, more to come, Shana Spence, as we delve into how to put joy in every bite that we have.